He has been in Oroville now 27 years, and he came from France. He has studied political science. He's a lover of Sanskrit, scholar in Sanskrit. He teaches in one of the schools in Oroville. It's called Last School. It's one of the very innovative experimental schools. He is one of the core member there. He was very graceful in agreeing to accept our invitation last minute. Thank you, John Yues.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before speaking of Indian polity, I want to pick up a few things about economy also. Listening to the previous interventions, by hearing about four Purushartha, it came to me that capitalism is, you can understand economy from this Purushartha also. Capitalism recognized artha and kama is the only dharma, because the market can regulate everything and solve everything. And what is the market? The exchange of desirable values. What is not desired has no value. So the belief that the exchange of desirable values can solve every problem on the planet, the market mechanism, is kama as being the only dharma necessary. Interesting. When socialism, they try to go directly from artha to dharma by squeezing kama in the process, and it devitalized completely the economy. Yeah. But there was no moksha anyway. Yes, the wealth of what you said, it's true. I mean, if we want to put together some of Gandhi's ideals, which sometimes sounds like kind of ascetic ideas of, holy poverty and economy, and we have to find a way of redefining what is wealth. And there are many kinds of wealth, it's true, and that's the main issue. A wealth of objects, a plethora of objects, is not really wealth. And in fact, there are intangible things that money cannot buy. For instance, the joy of progress. If you progress in your life, you have joy. If you serve something which is greater than you, you have joy. You cannot buy it. It cannot be taken from you. It escapes completely the categories of economy, and still it is something intangible that you get in some way. And it helps you to develop, to grow, which consumption of object doesn't do. So we have to redefine exactly what is supposed to grow when we speak of growth. Maybe it's consciousness, not the quantity of objects. Yes. Adam Smith, yes. Adam Smith, he made a revolution, because before him, for thousands of years, in every civilization, it was said that men should not be egoistic. We have to make an effort and to be as less egoistic as possible. He came and he said, actually, it's the opposite. Because if people pursue egoistically their interest, they go into an activity, they trade with others because they are specialized, so they trade and they create collective prosperity and happiness. Therefore, egoism is the guarantee of collective happiness. Fantastic, no? And it's such a relief for so many people. We can be egoistic, and the more egoistic we are, the more we contribute to collective happiness. And that's the good news of the century, of the last century. Yeah. And of course it became very popular. Still with economy, a quote from Sherbindo in the Human Cycle. There is a sentence about how he envisioned the economy of the future society, the transition between what he called the subjective age towards the spiritual age. And there would be a transmutation or a transformation of all the human activities and economy also. And then economy then would be to give to man, not only to some, but to all men, each in his highest possible measure, the joy of work according to their own nature, according to the swabhava, and free leisure to grow inwardly, as well as a simply rich and beautiful life for all. A simply rich, I like that very much. Yeah? Then you find that simplicity of living and richness of living can be combined. But one has to be in a certain state of consciousness where you don't need anymore all kind of material enjoyment to fill up the emptiness that you find in yourself. Now, let's speak about a little about Indian polity, ancient Indian polity. As an opening, I would like to read you some Sanskrit. First is come from the Rig Veda, the last hymn of the Rig Veda. It's very well known because it's like a prayer that maybe that was chanted at the beginning of an assembly, of a collective meeting. Yes. Sam gachadvam, sam vadadvam. Join together, speak together, or let your speak converge. Samvo manansi janatam. Let your minds arrive at one knowledge. And it concludes by saying, Samani va akuti, samana hridayani va, samanastuvo mano yatava sasaha sati. One and common be your aspiration. United your hearts. Common to you be your mind, so that close companionship may be yours. Beautiful invocation to unity and harmony in the collective. The other is from the Bhagavad Gita, because when we speak of Indian polity, we have to touch what is the fundamental paradigm that organize the Indian polity, and we find it formulated in the Bhagavad Gita, not about political matter, but more in a more general way. When Sri Krishna says, Yo yo yam yam tanum bhakta shraddhayar chitumicchati tasatatsya chalam shraddham tameva vidadhamyaham. Whoever and whatever forms he approach me in a faithful way with his faith, I support and I make stable this faith of him. So whatever way he once approached me, I support the faith, which solves the problem of all the religious quarrels. Because whatever forms is always a form of the one. And it's a very fundamental idea in Indian culture that there is the one, and there is a manifestation of the one in a multiplicity, and the one is expressed by the multiplicity, and therefore each part of this multiplicity has a right to exist and has to develop fully because it's a part of the one. And this is what was at the basis of the Indian, ancient Indian policy, but it was not organized deliberately from a kind of preconceived or conceived ideal and then applied. It grew up organically. At the beginning, maybe in the first communities, when they start to settle down and create villages, there were many republics. The republics were everywhere in India at the beginning. And the monarchical element grew slowly, emerged progressively, first a kind of leadership, and then in the course of time became more and more predominant. And there is a variety of formations of between the republic, the monarchical, or some kind of oligarchical senate. There was many possible forms of political organization. And when the monarchy became predominant, we think, when we speak of monarchy, to the European kind of absolute monarchy. But it was not that kind that was in India. Because when the monarch emerged as a political necessity, in fact, the society was already organized. It was organized by something called dharma, which was a vast corpus, that organized the whole life of individuals and communities. And this dharma was the law of Indian society. So when the king emerged, he emerged as part of the society, not above it. He was an element of the society and could not suddenly take himself out of it above and start to give orders to every part of it. No, he was caught also within, or he has to work under the yoke of the Dharma. He was a guardian of the Dharma. The king, his main function was that, to make sure that the Dharma, the different Dharmas, were respected. And to respect, therefore, the communities, each community having their own different dharmas. So it was more a kind of constitutional monarchy, except it was not constitution as we understand it today. It was just what Indian society had elaborated through centuries, and that was called the dharma, the Sanatana dharma. Alors, because each element of the universe is a manifestation of the one and has a specific nature, a swabhava, and has therefore a specific law of development, a swadharma. All these laws had to be respected. In our society today, we are used to have the same law for everyone. In ancient times, in ancient India, it was not like that, because what was considered was that each bhava had to evolve its own way and its own law. So villages or castes, jatis or shrenis, all the communities, they have their own law, their own jurisdictions, sometimes their own court, and they were dealing with their own business. And the king, or the council, or even the assembly of the kingdom, could not interfere with those communities. So there was a communal freedom. There was no individual freedom. I think the concept was not there. But communal freedom was fully recognized and protected. Now, this plurality of communities, whether they are villages, kulas, clans, or jatis, or townships, municipalities, they were all interrelated. They were all in interactions with each other. For instance, in the capital of the kingdom, there was an assembly. And all the villages sent their own representative to this assembly. The kingdom also had its own general assembly. Sometimes both assemblies would join together. And all the four varnas were represented in these assemblies. So all the elements of the Indian society were part of the global management of the society. When I studied political science, I never heard about ancient Indian polity. It's a non-existent object. Nobody knows. I think in India it's the same. Huh? Nobody knows how it was working. It has not been studied really. And it doesn't correspond very well to the categories that we use in the West. In the West, either you are a democracy, or it is an autocracy, or it is an oligarchy, or it is aristocracy. Yes, it has to be one of them. Now, in India, you find a little bit of everything, because it's true that there was religious ceremonies that made him a king. So he was king. His kingship was sacred, but they didn't give him absolute authority on anything. It was not related. Yes, it's true there was a democratic element because you had assemblies and representative of communities. It doesn't mean it was just only a democratic system. Sometimes the system was more oligarchic with the Senate of the wealthy people. So you have all these forms of government coexisted in an organic way because there was no preconceived plan. It just emerged out itself like this in a complex web. And this web is a web of self-determined community. That's the main characteristic of ancient Indian polity. All the different components of the society were considered were communities, whether villages or castes or guilds, and they were governing themselves in interaction with the others. So it was a complex system of self-determined body. And it stayed like this as long as the centralization didn't come to an extreme, and particularly after the invasions of the Central Asian power, the Turco-Mongols, who came with a completely different political culture of absolute, rule of the monarch. So they destroyed the whole system because they cut off the web. All these communities were meeting in assemblies of different kinds, or in the council of the king. Everything was related. Once these Central Asian people were in power, each community fell back into its own business, isolated from the others. Yes. And then it stopped becoming an organic whole because it was not organized anymore. It entered a phase of decline by lack of interactions. Each community being busy just reproducing itself in order to survive, to persist. But it was not a creative community political life anymore. Now, it's a very original model that for centuries India could evolve a system whose characteristic is to be a web, a network of self-determined communities, each one following its own dharma according to its own swabha. So what was missing to our modern eyes now was the individual aspect. Because there was no individual freedom. The individual was caught within his interactions, social interaction. He was part of a family, sometimes a joint family. He was part of a caste. He was part of a village. Yeah. And he was defined by that and by the duties he had to the village, to the caste, to the family. So there was no individual right. There was the notion of swabhava and swadharma didn't reach the point of touching the individual. So it's the only thing that could be added if we want to fuse together the modern view of individual freedom and the ancient view of swabhava and swadharma is to say, well, just take this notion of swabhava to define, and swadharma to define the individual freedom. Because I don't know if you have noticed, but when in the West we claim freedom, we don't know exactly what we say. Nobody knows. I want to be free. For what exactly? It's not defined. Freedom is not defined. Yes. Now, if you say there is a swabhav, you have your own nature, and therefore you have to follow the law of development of your true being. It makes sense to speak of freedom then. And freedom then is an essential component of your development. So I think that the Hindu concept of swabhava and swadharma can enrich the Western conception of freedom. During the French Revolution, one of the first things that was done was a Declaration of Human Rights. And the first sentence was, all men are born free. Now, try to translate that into Sanskrit. Sarve Manushya Mukta Jata. Mukta Jata. They are born liberated from the ego, because the idea of freedom in India is completely different. You are free from ignorance, you are free from the ego. So to say you are born free, what? How is it possible? No, you are born a slave. Yes. So this is when you see the difference of approach between the two. Yes. You cannot be born free, you have to become free. And to say, well, it was a kind of, what you say in French, a profession de foi, a faith in human beings, to say they are born free. What does that mean exactly? There's something in them that is free or should be free, but it's not elucidated. If you want to know what it means, you have to go to self-knowledge. Who am I? Who in me is or should be free? Swabhava and Swadharma. And that's something that could, I hope it will happen one day. There was a dialogue between West and East on the concept of freedom and the mutual enrichment, bringing individuality to Hindu conception and bringing this notion of Swabhava and Swadharma into the Western conception. Voilà, that's all I have to say on this subject.
So, when we say Swadharma and Swabhav, so how in my day-to-day life I can figure out what exactly my Swabhav is, and or which aspect of my life I should look into or contemplate, so that I may know this is my Swabhav and I should follow that. Similarly, Swadharma. And what is the basic difference between Swabhav and Swadharma?
The bhava is a nature of something. So swabhava means your own nature, your deeper nature. There is can be a kind of confusion between swabhava as part of prakriti or swabhava as an expression of purusha's soul. But let's take it that it corresponds to your true being, what you truly are, behind all the social roles that you have or what you learned at school, behind all this, there's somebody that you have to discover. And this somebody will follow a path of development, of progress. That would be a swadharma. But you have to know it by yourself. You have to go and discover who you are. There is no recipe, that you can follow point A, point B, point C, checklist. No. But if the youth in school could be told, you have in you somebody you have to discover and follow the path of that being. Don't follow the path of being an engineer or a lawyer to get a profession, because you might just waste your life doing that. Discover who you are and what this being in you needs in order to come in front and develop and express himself.
Thank you. Now these two words, Swadharma and Swabhava, and not just etymologically or grammatically, but in the very manifestation of them as part of reality, it points to soul, which also that soul, what is that soul? Now this soul has a participation in social and collective life, but at the same time, the soul is also an embodiment of soul. And therefore, ancient Indian thought, when it is talking about Swabhava, it also brings the soul dimension to our embodiment as individuals in society. And therefore, I would like to submit to think that the very conception that ancient India didn't play significance to individual, it needs to be foundationally rethought, because it is a product of Western categorization of Indian and Western thought. there is a deep significance of individual as illustrated by the notion of soul, and therefore some deep thinkers of ancient India, philosopher Dayakrishna, and he talks about how Indian thought is Atman-centric. And the other category is the sannyasi, the renouncer. Now, Swayambara, for example, Swadhyaya, the Swabhava and then Swayambara. In ancient India, the women had the freedom to choose. That means they had the freedom to say no. So therefore, this idea of individual needs to be recognized. The Western notion of freedom also, from France itself, Alain Touraine, the great sociologist, made this thoughtful comment that even the free individual in Western society is as much bounded as an individual in traditional society, because both of them are bounded to their existing conception of social growth.
Yes, I think you are right. The conception of the free individual is an imaginary conception. So maybe Westerners dream of themselves as being free. It doesn't mean that they are. They are very much conditioned by all kind of things in their decision. But they like thinking of themselves as free, and free of any duty to anything. But I agree, it's more an imagination than a reality. Yes. Real freedom is much more difficult to get.
My question is to Jean-Yves. In the ancient India, especially a little later than really the ancient, during the small and big kingdoms when they ruled and fought against one another, at the same time there was some kind of visible unity at the spiritual level or socio-cultural level. In that context, in that particular historical context, my question would be, what was the concept of self-governance and how did it differ from one kingdom to the other?
I think in ancient India, the common language in diplomacy between the states, Bengal and Gujarat and others, Tamil Nadu, was Sanskrit. Otherwise, they would not be able to communicate. There was no English at that time. Later on, there was Persian that came through the Muslims, but Sanskrit has been there for a long time, yes. Even when Prakrit was practiced by the common people, Prakrit language. Yeah. I don't know what you call self-governance exactly. What I said was that the communities had the possibility to manage their own business without interference from the state. Yes. In that sense, there was some kind of self-governance everywhere. And each village was a little republic. Each town has its own independent, kind of parliament or assembly, let's say. And the castes also had their own jurisdictions. So in that sense, there was self-governance everywhere, and all related to each other.
I recalled Mother saying that every person
Who
has
said
something
it?
unique that they can
It's
do
a
better than
famous
anyone
guess.
else. Better than anyone else in the world. We each have something we can do. That really puzzled me for a long time. But as to the method for finding it, I would say to aspire for it sincerely and to ask the Mother, who is the giver of all things, until you get it, to persist in that. And also, there was a statement by Sri Aurobindo that this French Revolution was conceived by a sadhu in the Himalaya. And he says that somewhere. Yeah, it was his conception, and but when what happened on earth, on ground, was not the supreme conception. But oftentimes liberty and equality are spoken of more than fraternity.
You can institute a system where freedom, individual freedom, is guaranteed by law. You can institute a system where there is political equality and a relative economic equality. You cannot institute, fraternity, brotherhood. You cannot make laws that will produce brotherhood. It has to be there. So the third term, equality, brotherhood, is the key term, and it's the one you cannot engineer through economical or political systems. It has to be a change of consciousness. And this is where everybody is told, you know.
But I think the day has to come that national leaders have to speak these things. For example, I was saying to someone earlier, it really hurt me a lot, this whole thing that happened recently in Delhi, so much destruction, you know, of this, all these CAA protests, which are just nonsensical. And I'm thinking the leaders need to say, look, you're harming yourself by destroying this. That we have to get to a more subjective approach, I think, in our collective life. We have to think about the psychology behind things. Because if you just try to manipulate the outer circumstances, it won't work. See, the railway rates went up because so much was destroyed, and that is a question I will ask all of you. What is your idea of how can the collectivity of the mass of humanity be taught not to destroy things physically when they have some difficulty? What would be required to stop this phenomenon? It's so wasteful, no?
Difficult question, and answer is only an attempt. I think Swaraj, in the sense in which Gandhi conceptualized, was individual's duty upon insisting on one's truth. Now, since the capital truth is still unknown and the quest is on for humanity, the conviction for smaller truths comes into conflict. And it is this conflict that we see very often unfolding. And when this kind of conflict comes, Gandhi came with a freshness to explain the small truth about which he developed conviction, and he was able to tell the community which was affected about that small truth, to develop such conviction, and then to appeal to the other group about their conviction. And it is this process in which Satyagraha is born. Now this Satyagraha, when we say that, which is actually it is Satyagraha because it is my truth which I am trying to explain to you, and I have a preparedness to understand your truth also. So it is at this level where the conflict has to be understood and resolved. Now the part of Swaraj where I have to practice as a Satyagrahi, I have to see that in this process of protesting or offering Satyagraha, I am not going to any destruction which in some sense is violence. Now on either side, if this happens, both are violating the norm because they are not trained in Swaraj. This is what is the position now. So there it is not a question of whether if I feel I am right and therefore I have a right also to destroy. The civil disobedience movement in 1921 after the Chauri Chaura incidents, because he said that people are not prepared to understand what is non-violent protest against a very oppressive law which has come. So in present circumstances, if I perceive that the law is oppressive, then my way of protest has to be as a Satyagrahi, and in order to offer the Satyagraha, I have to be a continuously trained Satyagrahi. And the things essential elements essential to become a satyagrahi all along is to be eternally vigilant, which Gandhi had tried to practice and explain to us, was to continuously do Atma Nirikshan, self observation of the self, Atma Parikshan, testing of the self, and Atma Shodhan, which is correction of the self. So, and this is a very continuous process. If you are not in this process, then you are not actually qualified to offer the satyagraha. But after Gandhi, we have found this to be an easy way, that we go and say that we are making a non-violent protest. Unfortunately, that is not enough. That is not adequate to be just manifest non-violence is not enough. The soul force only comes when you actually exercise continuously the swaraj, that you get your own swaraj, and then you get this, right to offer satyagraha. So we are in a problem. As a society today, we are in a problem, because we have not understood the nuance of this satyagraha, and we are trying to put up protest. So there is manifest violence, and this manifest violence comes because there is so much of structural violence in the system. And it is this structural violence which actually manifests at times, because it remains latent for a long time, but it erupts when some such, points, or when some thresholds are crossed.
Now, in your many aspects you presented, one also key theme is the issue of inequality. And in classical texts, what is the reflection on the percentage of difference between the highest paid and the lowest paid? For example, in Manu Sangita, there is the injunction that the highest paid cannot be paid more than, say, 6 times of the lowest paid. This also brings the question of income inequality, and this is a profound challenge today. The other thing is about common resources, and about also the right of animals and the non-human beings, and what is the thought, and how do you have to preserve it. And my quick submissions to Sudarshan Bhai is that in your fascinating, bringing of the category of Tantra and Tattva, and it is understandable, but at the same time, because you are using the language of Tantra, now Tantra is not just mechanics. Therefore, what Gandhi is bringing, not only Tantra and Tantva, but Sadhana. And at one level, Gandhi is also very tantric. His grandson Ramachandra Gandhi has said that the world has not seen a greater tantric than Gandhi. And your other thought about Spinoza and Gandhi is very interesting. And what is the possibilities to confront the challenge of the present, including the problem of religious violence? Because Spinoza was working in a time, so he was working against a theocratic exclusion. And so both politically and spiritually today, in terms of secularism, we need to bring that dimension of Spinoza and Gandhi. And my final quick query to Jen is, building on what I was saying, because when he was pointing to the inadequacy of the categories of existing political discourse to understand ancient India, this is also points to the limits of the contemporary political discourse. For example, democracy. Now, existing democracy, is it authoritarian or democratic? And whether it is in USA or India, which is then pointing to the need for evolution of forms of political organization, which Sri Aurobindo is also challenging us. So my submission therefore, what kind of forms of political unit are evolving, which goes beyond the existing polarity between monarchy and democracy. And we must also know that from the Chinese side, now there is a reconfiguration of meritocracy. Meritocracy and democracy, how we would have to combine together.
When I am using the Tantra and Tattva in the context of Gandhi, understanding Gandhi, I have tried to understand that the conflicts and conflict resolution in the Western philosophical framework, by and large, with the advances in science and technology, has been with the systems. And there is an issue of sustainability over there. So, Gandhi is trying to tell us that there may be less social and environmental externality and cost if you try to focus on tattva, which means the individual's swaraj. That is the limited point I am making. But I take it that when you try to do your swaraj, it is a sadhana. And therefore I said that in this sadhana, you are eternally vigilant about your inner self, and that is where I said that there has to be a, self observation of the self, examination of the self and correction of the self. The Atma Nirikshan, Atma Parikshan and Atma Shodhan, this is what I am trying to say. So in that sense it's a very difficult sadhana. And in a very different way, the Tantra and Tattva is in this sense that for Gandhi, the existence, the identity of the primary identity of the individual is of being of that person. And rest are actually identities, the secondary identities which get added in terms of religion, economic status, caste, etc., which Gandhi discards. And therefore he resolves these issues of, and in his framework he resolves this issue of the differences that society creates in terms of class, caste, gender and everything. So for him, irrespective of gender, class, sect, everything, the practice or the sadhana is about the Swaraj. So if we go to that level, then the identity, the primary identity of the being gets established. So that is a very limited point I am trying to understand. So in that sense, being a tantric and to be a sadhana is completely the area which I'm not very competent to respond to that. But I have understood in this framework, and it works, because I give a very simple example that you can't do drunken driving in Europe and America, because the third time you do, your license is gone. And in my country, in our country, we know that you can do n number of times, because we can only produce a rupee of 100 rupee note and the constable says jao. But Gandhi was trying to tell us that we have to work on myself, that I don't get into drinking. So now this is the difference as I understand. In the kind of everybody, the concept of being free is that I am licentious. You can't ask me what I will do. I can choose my own poison. I can hang myself as long as I am not disturbing you. That is one level of freedom. And Swaraj is something for which I find that I do that as what are my duties towards myself. And my duty to myself helps me in being a person with others whom I can live better with less of a tantra. Then I don't require, I am again quoting the CCTV camera. See, we don't need, there is technology, yes. One is very happy to now note that you can't violate traffic rules, because now you have a system where your number gets come in and you get an e-memo that you have violated the traffic rule. It's a facility. But it doesn't change my mindset. I will see if the CCTV camera is not working, I am going to break the rule. I am not given an opportunity to improve myself to say that I shouldn't be doing this. I think that is the tattvic matter which I am trying to. So it is working on that which Gandhi, I think, was trying. And that is more sustainable in a very material sense also, because all that system that we have created is so expensive now in terms of resource use, financially and otherwise, that we have actually become unsustainable because of that.
I don't think it's I don't know if we need new forms of political organization, because we have the habit of thinking that if we change the system and put another system in place, things will change. No, they don't. Because we do what we are. I mean, we manifest outside what we are within. Whatever change of system you do, at the end you find the same thing. So after the French Revolution, we had an emperor, and the kings came back, and the capitalist class came back. It was just another oppression instead of a new kind of oppression. After the communist revolution, we had Stalin, a new kind of Tsar. The same thing that was there just came back. So it's not a question of political forms and organization, it's a question of who do we want to be? Who do we choose to be together? That's a much more radical and difficult question to answer.
In modern Indian literature, in Indian languages, there are many novels written by very good writers about people escaping their villages and going to cities because they find a greater freedom for the individuals, for their being. We have that in cinema as well, depicted. And if novels and cinema and theatre, they're depicting this, there must be an element of truth. I was born in a village, and I found when I moved to a small town or a large city that I could be more, I'm not justifying urban settlement as a viable economic system, but since you started speaking about the individual identity, individual being and other identities, do you think there might be a good reason in human history for humans having created cities? Or was it without a reason, or it was accidental, or it was an aberration, or a fall from some ideal? And if that is not exactly the case, do you think that Gandhi's thinking on economy, which is, I mean, it's very bold, and new thought always requires boldness of that kind. But do you think there is some inadequacy? And I'll add to my question, like we cannot, we are using modern terminology, categories, we cannot assess what was the Indian economic practice in the past. I understand that, because these categories are irrelevant. But is it possible to understand modern economies by using traditional categories? Are they foolproof? Is there some inadequacy there in those categories? So this is the second. And the third related to this is the question of caste. Will Shreni enhance the casteness of a person who is working as a cobbler, scavenger, somebody who is engaged in undesirable work? Will Shreni as a system force the person into that being, or is there some escape? So all these three together make one question, and that is not change necessary in the tradition for acquiring greater humanism? All saint poets for 1,000 years were shouting from the rooftops, saying, let's humanize God, let's drop these systems, the society has become awful, let's bring some reforms. So, and this is before the British came here, before the Portuguese brought Western kind of trade and business practice here. That, so I'm just asking that.
I mean, very, very complex issue, and uh, there is some inadequacy to the extent to which Gandhi tried to, as Nehru really thought that you are trying to romanticize what it is. But Gandhi's response to that in the letter of 1945 October, which he wrote to Nehru, he said that, where am I saying that the present Indian villages are the ideal villages? But my ideal village is in my imagination. And everybody has a right to imagine and express the imagination. And in that imagination, he defines the village that each person is enlightened in that. Now, this is an ideal which Gandhi wants to bring by putting the politico-economic system where definitely he talks about the duty of those who are superior, and the right of those who do not have. Now, until such a situation is really formed, or the process is actually unfolding in the village, that is where I think the role of the state comes. And as you rightly pointed out in the morning, I think that rights discourse and the discourse of the duty both actually are needed when you initiate this, and therefore you require a state to give that protection, for which Ambedkar was intensely disturbed, and he said that, Bapu, you don't understand that this is not possible.
He had studied in London School of Economics.
Yes, and Ambedkar said that, Bapu, this is just not possible, and I just want these rights to be established, and only state can ensure that we get these rights. And I think that Ambedkar has a very strong point. The problem is that after having our constitutional guarantees, we are still not free of the mindset, because by making a constitutional provision, we sort of became complacent, and my own responsibility of this as a citizen, I have just absolved myself of any responsibility of change in my mindset. I will say, अच्छा जाओ तुम atrocity का case कर डालो, I will go and fight. And then you have a Supreme Court which says that now you cannot entertain all, I mean it has to go into the merit of the case, and then it may not be, this can be victimization, etc. Now look at what has happened with the law. So the need for changing the mindset, which is again the practice of Ekadash Vrat at individual level, is not gone. It's not gone. It is continuous effort that we will have to try to do, and at the basic level it is quite convincing, to me at least, that if we understand that for Gandhi the primary identity is the individual, and you don't really impose any other identity on the person to begin with, and then you try to form a society, then it's a functional division of the economic occupation which becomes relevant and respected. This is the point. And I think that when now it is Vijay Diwan who is doing it, sitting and working on the dead animals, and it was our who worked in Sevagram, a Brahmin who went and sat down there. This was the efforts in Gandhi's time which happened, because they said that let's break these barriers. It's an occupation and it's a good occupation, let's do it. So now that you have, if you have an MBA passing out and opening a vada pav shop, now opening a vada pav shop in good old days would have been some, what is this? You are opening a vada pav shop. But if you have a Jumbo King vada pav outlet, then it becomes a modern management sort of tactics. So in that sense, the attitude change also is very important, along with the legal protection that we need. I see both as complementary, and I see the solution over there, and we have to strictly honor both the the constitutional rights which have been given, which is a part of system, which is part of tantra, and individual efforts to change. I should practice my own swaraj, and from that only I think this will happen. Interestingly, the bhakti movement has helped us so much in this, and it is Kabir, who could say this, and he could tell Muslims and he could tell Hindus. He said to Muslims, he said, काकर पाथर जोड़ के मस्जिद दियो चिनाए, ताचड़ी मुल्ला बांग दे क्या बहरो हुओ खुदाए. By assembling your stones and these things, you have built a mosque, and you are standing on the top of masjid, and you are giving your call, the bang that you do. You think that the God is deaf? This he tells to Muslims, and this is in the 15th and 16th century he is making this. And then to Hindus he says, Pahan puje hari mile to main poojun pahad. If I worship the stone, then I will, if I get my God by worshipping the stone, then I will worship the mountain. Jate ye chaki bhali, pi sikhaye sansar. Better is this chakki through which people can eat, do the floor and eat. It is this strength that this whole bhakti movement brought to us, where we could, at that level, we could establish, the equality in some sense. So I think all these three forces, and what Kabir is essentially saying is this, that how can I feel the difference? I can't. We are just one. So there is no difference. So all forces will have to work together. I think that's where I feel the answer.
I admitted that I'm a very recent student. I can also always get away by saying I don't know enough, but I can share what I intuitively feel and from my own experience and from what little information I have. I personally very deeply resonate with what you shared, because as a woman I grew up in a very conventional and I could even call it oppressive kind of a context, and I found my freedom when I moved to the US as a student. And for the first time when I was 23 years old, I didn't have to carry the baggage that I was a woman. So I can completely understand and connect with what you shared, and it's true. And I think as part of my sharing, I also mentioned the evolutionary nature of our Shastras and how Kautilya has mentioned many earlier authors, and that we need to rewrite our Shastras, discarding a lot of the elements that were dysfunctional back then. But personally, I'm also coming from the other end of throwing everything about my roots and my culture out of the window, because growing up I thought it was all oppressive and nothing. So I really came from a very colonized space to rediscovering the wealth that we have. So I always carry a bit of suspicion when I approach ancient texts. And very recently I was reading the Yajnavalkya Smriti, and I was, what really amazed me, I read through the whole text, but it was very difficult for me to read it because there were aspects there that was brilliant, that related to really understanding very in a nuanced way how to organize ourselves and how to create systems. Those systems can't change behavior by themselves, but it's also possible to create certain conditions that are conducive to encourage certain behaviors and reward them, to kind of hold the norm of the society. And there was brilliance, and then there were sections that really were repulsive, that had to do with caste and how it talked about women. It was extremely difficult for me to read through those sections. So I think we are, and when I look at our own tradition, as I read some of our own smritis and shastras, personally I feel as a student I'm trying to locate which era or which period it comes from and what was the context back then, so to also have some compassion. But definitely going forward we have to take very clear stands and call out whatever needs to be called out and reformed and changed radically, not just reformed.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Sudarshan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sureka ji. Yeah.